The humid Louisiana air hung heavy over the sprawling grounds of Oakwood Penitentiary, a maximum security prison nestled deep in the bayou. The facility was known for its strict discipline and harsh conditions, but beneath its cold steel bars and concrete walls lay secrets darker than anyone could imagine. It was here that the story began, a tale of forbidden relationships, betrayal, and ultimately murder. On a sweltering August morning, Officer Daniel Harper stood at his post near Cell Block C. A tall man with piercing blue eyes and an authoritative demeanor, Harper had been working at Oakwood for 5 years. He prided himself on being fair yet firm, earning respect from both inmates and colleagues alike. But what no one knew, what he fought to keep hidden, was the secret relationship brewing between him and inmate Tessa Monroe, a young woman serving time for armed robbery. Tessa was different from the other prisoners. At just 24, she possessed a quiet strength that masked her vulnerability. Her dark hair framed a face marked by sadness, but there was something magnetic about her spirit. When Daniel first met her during routine patrols, their interactions were professional. Over time, however, curiosity turned into connection. Conversations grew longer, glances lingered, and boundaries blurred until they crossed a line neither could come back from. Their meetings happened in stolen moments, in supply closets after lights out or during late-night corridor checks when the halls were empty. To the outside world, it seemed impossible. A prison guard falling for an inmate violated every rule. Yet their bond felt real to them. For Tessa, Daniel represented hope, a way out of the suffocating monotony of incarceration. For Daniel, Tessa offered solace from the pressures of his job and the loneliness of his personal life. But not everyone inside Oakwood kept their heads down. Rumors spread like wildfire through the prison grapevine. Inmates whispered about favoritism, noticing how Daniel always seemed to be assigned shifts near Tessa's block. Even some guards grew suspicious, though none dared confront him directly. Among those watching closely was Warden Marcus Greer, a gruff man whose reputation for running a tight ship made him feared by all. Greer didn't tolerate misconduct, especially among his staff, and if word reached him about Daniel and Tessa, the consequences would be severe. As summer gave way to fall, another complication arose. Tessa discovered she was pregnant. Panic set in as reality crashed down around them. If news of the pregnancy got out, it would mean disaster, not only for Daniel's career, but also for Tessa's safety. Pregnant inmates were often targets within the prison hierarchy, vulnerable to exploitation and violence. Desperate to protect her, Daniel promised to find a way to get her transferred to a safer facility before anyone found out. Meanwhile, tensions simmered elsewhere in the prison. Inmate Rachel Red Dupree, a notorious gang leader serving multiple life sentences, had taken notice of Tessa's growing closeness with Daniel. Red despised weakness and saw opportunity in exploiting Tessa's predicament. She began subtly pressuring Tessa for information, using threats against her unborn child as leverage. Trapped between fear and loyalty, Tessa struggled to maintain composure while juggling her secret romance and Red's menacing advances. One fateful night in early November, everything changed. During a routine head count, officers discovered Tessa unconscious in her cell, bleeding heavily. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, where doctors confirmed she had suffered a severe beating. Though stable, Tessa refused to name her attacker, leaving investigators baffled. Suspicion naturally fell on Red, who denied involvement despite glaring circumstantial evidence pointing her way. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that tragedy struck again. On a chilly evening, Tessa's body was found dumped in a shallow grave near the edge of the swamp surrounding the prison. An autopsy revealed she had died from blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted during the same attack that sent her to the hospital. The discovery sent shockwaves through Oakwood and beyond, drawing media attention and prompting calls for justice. Enter Detective Clara Hayes, a seasoned investigator with the Louisiana State Police. Known for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of truth, Clara had spent decades unraveling complex cases across the state. Assigned to lead the investigation into Tessa's murder, she arrived at Oakwood determined to uncover what really happened behind those iron gates. Clara wasted no time diving into the case. She started by reviewing surveillance footage from the days leading up to Tessa's death, searching for anything unusual. Interviews with staff and inmates followed, each conversation revealing fragments of a larger puzzle. Some claimed ignorance, others hinted at corruption within the ranks, but one name kept surfacing: Daniel Harper. Despite mounting pressure to close the case quickly, Clara knew rushing would only lead to mistakes. As she pieced together clues, a chilling picture emerged, one of forbidden love, jealousy, and betrayal. What she didn't yet realize was how deeply intertwined these elements were with the sinister forces lurking within Oakwood Penitentiary. And so, the stage was set for a harrowing journey into darkness, where nothing was as it seemed and everyone had something to hide. The question remained, could Detective Hayes untangle the web of deceit before more lives were lost? Only time would tell. Detective Clara Hayes stood outside Oakwood Penitentiary, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as she surveyed the scene. The swampy mist clung to the air, carrying with it the faint scent of decay, a fitting backdrop for the grim task ahead. Inside those walls lay secrets buried deeper than the roots of the cypress trees surrounding the prison, and Clara was determined to dig them up. Her first stop was the warden's office. Marcus Greer sat behind his desk, a mountain of a man whose weathered face betrayed years of hard decisions and sleepless nights. His eyes narrowed as Clara introduced herself, his tone clipped but professional. "Detective Hayes," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What can I do to assist your investigation?" Clara didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need full access to personnel files, surveillance footage, and any reports filed around the time of Tessa Monroe's attack and subsequent death. No exceptions." Greer hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, but let me be clear. This is a tightly run facility. If anyone here crossed the line, they'll answer for it. You have my word." As Clara left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that Greer's cooperation was too polished, almost rehearsed. Still, she had work to do. Her next step was reviewing the security tapes. The prison's CCTV system covered most areas, though blind spots existed, particularly in the older sections of the building. Clara pored over hours of footage, her focus unwavering. It wasn't long before something caught her eye. On the night of Tessa's initial attack, Daniel Harper had been seen lingering near her cell block far longer than necessary. His movements appeared hurried, almost furtive, as if he were trying not to be noticed. When questioned later about his actions, Harper claimed he was conducting routine checks, but the timing raised red flags. Meanwhile, Clara interviewed staff members who worked alongside Harper. Most praised him as diligent and trustworthy, but cracks began to show beneath the surface. One guard, a wiry man named Carl Jenkins, admitted under pressure that Harper had seemed distracted in recent months. "He was always sneaking off somewhere," Jenkins said, avoiding Clara's gaze. "Never said where he was going, but I heard rumors. You know, about him and Monroe." Rumors weren't enough to convict someone, but they fueled Clara's suspicions. She decided to speak with Harper directly. Daniel Harper looked nervous when summoned to an interrogation room. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. Clara studied him carefully, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his eyes darted toward the door. "Officer Harper," she began, her voice calm but firm, "can you tell me where you were on the evening of November 12th? Harper swallowed hard. I was doing my rounds, like always." Clara leaned forward, placing a still frame from the surveillance footage on the table between them. It showed Harper standing near Tessa's cell just minutes before the estimated time of the attack. "Care to explain this?" For a moment, Harper said nothing. Then, exhaling sharply, he confessed. "Okay, fine. I was with Tessa. We had a relationship. I know it was wrong, but I cared about her. That night, I went to check on her because she'd been acting scared. She told me someone had threatened her, but she wouldn't say who. Before I could get more details, we heard footsteps. I panicked and left." Clara's expression remained unreadable. "Did you see anyone else nearby? Hear anything unusual?" "No," Harper replied, shaking his head. "But I swear, Detective, I didn't hurt her. I loved her." The confession added complexity to the case. While Harper's admission painted him as reckless and emotionally compromised, it didn't necessarily make him a killer. Clara needed more evidence to connect the dots. She turned her attention to the inmates, starting with Rachel "Red" Dupree. Red was housed in solitary confinement following Tessa's murder, allegedly for inciting unrest among the prisoner population. Clara entered the dimly lit cell block, where Red lounged on a metal cot, her arms crossed defiantly. "Detective," Red drawled, smirking. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I'm investigating Tessa Monroe's death," Clara stated bluntly. "Word is you didn't exactly see eye to eye with her." Red shrugged. "Tessa kept to herself, mostly. Didn't cause trouble. Not my problem." "But you threatened her," Clara pressed. "Sources say you wanted information about her connection to Officer Harper. Is that true?" Red's smirk faltered for a split second before returning. "Even if I did, doesn't mean I killed her. Plenty of people hated her guts. Ask around. You might find better suspects than me." Though Red denied involvement, Clara noted the subtle shift in her demeanor during the conversation. There was guilt there, or at least knowledge of something significant. Back at the precinct, Clara reviewed the growing pile of evidence. Harper's confession placed him at the scene, but offered no motive for murder. Red's behavior suggested she knew more than she let on, yet proving her culpability required concrete proof. Meanwhile, autopsies revealed traces of sedatives in Tessa's system, indicating she may have been drugged prior to the fatal blow. This detail pointed to premeditation rather than a spontaneous act of violence. Then came the breakthrough. While re-examining surveillance footage, Clara spotted a figure slipping into the infirmary shortly after Tessa's body was discovered. The person wore scrubs and moved with familiarity, suggesting they belonged to the medical staff. Zooming in, Clara identified the individual as Nurse Evelyn Carter, a longtime employee at Oakwood. Evelyn's name hadn't come up during earlier interviews, but now Clara wondered why. Tracking down her personnel file, she uncovered discrepancies in Evelyn's background check. Specifically, references listed on her application couldn't be verified. Confronting Evelyn proved challenging. The nurse initially cooperated, providing alibis for the nights in question. However, when confronted with inconsistencies in her story, Evelyn broke down. "I only gave her the pills," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "They told me she needed them to calm down. I didn't know they planned to kill her." "They?" Clara demanded. Evelyn hesitated, clearly torn between fear and self-preservation. Finally, she whispered, "Warden Greer. He found out about Harper and Tessa. Said it would ruin the prison's reputation if word got out. He ordered me to sedate her so they could stage an accident. I thought they just wanted to scare her." Shocked, Clara realized the conspiracy ran deeper than she'd imagined. With Evelyn's testimony corroborated by surveillance footage showing Greer entering restricted areas around the time of Tessa's death, Clara assembled a warrant for the warden's arrest. Yet even as pieces fell into place, questions lingered. Why had Greer gone to such extremes? What role did Red play in all this? And most importantly, how many others were complicit in silencing Tessa Monroe forever? As Clara prepared to interrogate Warden Greer, she knew one thing for certain. Justice for Tessa would require exposing every shadow hiding within Oakwood's walls. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the humid chaos of Oakwood Penitentiary. Clara Hayes sat across from Warden Marcus Greer, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp as daggers. Greer, handcuffed to the table, exuded an air of defiance despite his predicament. His usual authoritative demeanor had cracked slightly, revealing the tension beneath. "Warden Greer," Clara began, placing Evelyn Carter's signed affidavit on the table between them. "Care to explain why your nurse claims you ordered her to sedate Tessa Monroe?" Greer glanced at the document without touching it, his jaw tightening. After a long pause, he sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "Detective, running a maximum security prison isn't just about enforcing rules. It's about maintaining order, keeping the public image intact. When I found out about Harper and Monroe," he trailed off, shaking his head, "it wasn't just inappropriate, it was reckless. If word got out, it would have destroyed this facility's reputation." Clara leaned forward, her voice steady. "So you decided to silence her? Is that what you're saying?" "No," Greer snapped, then caught himself, lowering his tone. "I never wanted anyone hurt. All I did was ask Evelyn to give Tessa something to calm her down, enough to make her think twice about pursuing this situation further. That's all." "That's not what Evelyn said," Clara countered. "According to her statement, She administered sedatives under your orders shortly before Tessa's attack. You can't deny being involved. Greer's face flushed red, his composure slipping. For a moment, he looked like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. Then, almost reluctantly, he added, "Fine. Yes, I gave the order. But I didn't plan for things to escalate. Someone else took matters into their own hands." "Who?" Clara demanded. Greer hesitated again, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he muttered, "Rachel Dupree." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Red, you're blaming an inmate?" "Not directly," Greer clarified. "After Evelyn dosed Tessa, word spread among the inmates. Red intercepted her en route to the infirmary. I don't know exactly what happened next. I wasn't there. But when Tessa turned up dead, I knew Red had gone too far." This revelation shifted the focus back to Rachel Dupree, whose earlier denial now seemed more calculated than truthful. Clara left Greer stewing in the interrogation room and returned to the prison, determined to confront Red once more. When Clara entered solitary confinement, Red was waiting, lounging casually on her cot, as if she owned the place. Her smirk widened upon seeing Clara. "Back so soon, Detective?" Red drawled. "Miss me already?" Clara ignored the jab, pulling up a chair and sitting directly in front of the cell. "Let's cut the games, Red. We know you were involved in Tessa's death. What we don't know is how much and whether you acted alone." Red's smirk faltered ever so slightly, but she quickly recovered. "You think I'm stupid enough to confess to murder? Prove it." "We will," Clara replied evenly. "But here's what we already know. Warden Greer ordered Nurse Carter to sedate Tessa because of her relationship with Officer Harper. Once Tessa was drugged, you stepped in. Why? Did Greer put you up to it? Or did you decide to take advantage of the situation yourself?" For the first time since their meeting began, Red's confidence wavered. She shifted uncomfortably on the cot, avoiding Clara's gaze. "I didn't kill her," Red finally said, her voice quieter than before. "Yeah, I threatened her. She was getting cozy with Harper, and that pissed me off. But when I heard she'd been drugged, I figured someone else would finish the job. I wasn't going to risk my neck for it." "But you still profited from her death," Clara pressed. "Word around the prison is you used Tessa's demise to strengthen your hold over the other inmates. Fear keeps them in line, doesn't it?" Red shrugged nonchalantly, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the cot. "Maybe, but that doesn't make me a killer." Clara studied her carefully, sensing there was more to the story. "If you didn't kill her, who did? Who finished what Warden Greer started?" Red hesitated, her resolve crumbling under Clara's relentless questioning. Finally she muttered, "Ask Harper. He knows more than he's letting on." The accusation sent a chill through Clara. She'd suspected Daniel Harper might be hiding something, but tying him directly to Tessa's murder hadn't crossed her mind until now. Returning to the precinct, Clara reviewed Harper's alibi one last time. Though he claimed innocence, inconsistencies emerged when cross-referenced with new evidence. Harper had access to restricted areas where surveillance cameras malfunctioned suspiciously around the time of Tessa's death. Additionally, several inmates reported seeing him arguing with Tessa days before the attack. One witness even claimed to overhear Harper pleading with Tessa to end their relationship, warning her it was becoming dangerous. Confronted with these findings, Harper broke down during a second interrogation. Tears streaming down his face, he confessed to losing control after discovering Tessa planned to expose their affair to authorities. "She said she couldn't keep living a lie," Harper choked out. "She wanted to tell everyone, the warden, the media, the whole world. I begged her not to, but she wouldn't listen. That night, after finding her drugged in the hallway, I panicked. I thought maybe I could reason with her one last time. But when she woke up screaming, calling me a coward, I lost it. I grabbed the nearest object, a fire extinguisher, and..." He buried his face in his hands, unable to finish. Clara felt no satisfaction in hearing the truth. Instead, she felt the weight of tragedy. A young woman silenced forever because of fear, pride, and misplaced loyalty. With Harper's confession corroborated by physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, the case against him was ironclad. Yet Clara couldn't shake the feeling that justice remained incomplete. Too many players had contributed to Tessa's death, each motivated by greed, power, or desperation. As charges were filed against Harper, Greer, and Evelyn Carter, Clara reflected on the systemic failures that allowed such corruption to thrive within Oakwood Penitentiary. The prison represented more than just bars and guards. It symbolized a broken system where accountability often eluded those in power. But Clara wasn't done yet. There were still loose ends to tie up, secrets buried deeper than any grave, and she intended to uncover every single one. The storm rolled in overnight, drenching the Louisiana bayou in sheets of rain that turned the swamp into a mirror of ripples and shadows. Detective Clara Hayes stood at the edge of the marshlands surrounding Oakwood Penitentiary, her boots sinking slightly into the mud as she stared out at the murky waters. This was where Tessa Monroe's body had been found, dumped carelessly like trash, hidden among the cypress trees and tangled roots. But Clara knew the swamp held more than just Tessa's remains. It held answers. Clara wasn't alone. Accompanying her were two forensic experts and a team of cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains. The goal was simple: scour the area for any additional evidence tied to Tessa's murder. While Daniel Harper had confessed to killing her, something about the case still gnawed at Clara. The sedatives administered by Nurse Evelyn Carter, Warden Greer's orchestrations, Red's manipulations, all pointed to a conspiracy far larger than one man's crime of passion. If others had been involved, their traces might still linger in this desolate landscape. As the search progressed, the dogs began barking excitedly near a cluster of twisted tree trunks half submerged in water. Clara waded through the muck, her flashlight cutting through the gloom as forensic technicians carefully unearthed what appeared to be fragments of fabric and bone. One piece caught Clara's attention, a scrap of orange cloth bearing the faint outline of a prison emblem. "Bag it," she instructed, her pulse quickening. "This isn't from Tessa." Further examination revealed the remains belonged to another victim, a male inmate named Calvin Pops Jenkins, who had gone missing nearly 6 months earlier. Pops was known around Oakwood as a harmless old-timer, serving time for petty theft. His disappearance had barely registered with prison officials at the time, dismissed as an escape attempt gone wrong. Now his discovery raised troubling questions. Back at the precinct, Clara dug into Pops's file, searching for connections to Tessa's case. What she uncovered sent chills down her spine. According to prison logs, Pops had worked in the laundry room alongside Tessa during her early days at Oakwood. They weren't close friends, but they spoke occasionally, bonding over shared grievances about life behind bars. More importantly, Pops had witnessed something, or someone, he shouldn't have. Inmate testimony painted a clearer picture. Several prisoners recalled Pops bragging about overhearing a heated argument between Warden Greer and Officer Harper shortly before his disappearance. The topic? Tessa Monroe. According to Pops, he'd heard Greer threatening Harper, warning him to clean up his mess or face consequences. Clara realized Pops hadn't vanished because of an escape attempt. He'd been silenced. And if Greer was willing to eliminate a harmless inmate to protect his secrets, how many others might have met similar fates? Her next step was revisiting the prison staff. She focused on lower-ranking employees, janitors, cooks, maintenance workers, who might have observed suspicious activity without realizing its significance. One name kept surfacing: Jimmy Ray, a groundskeeper responsible for maintaining the swampy perimeter around Oakwood. Jimmy Ray was a wiry man in his late 40s with sunken eyes and a nervous twitch. When Clara questioned him, he seemed eager to cooperate, though his answers were vague. "I don't know nothing about no bodies," he stammered, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. "Just do my job. Keep the place looking decent." "Then why did multiple inmates report seeing you arguing with Warden Greer near the swamp last spring?" Clara asked, sliding a photo of Pops across the table. "Recognize this man?" Jimmy Ray paled, his cigarette falling from his lips. After a long silence, he sighed heavily. "Look, I didn't want to get mixed up in none of this. All I did was drive the truck when they told me to. Didn't ask questions, didn't want to know." "Who told you?" Clara pressed. "Greer," Jimmy Ray admitted, "said there was some troublemaker causing problems, needed to teach him a lesson. Next thing I know, we're hauling a body out to the swamp. I swear, detective, I didn't lay a hand on nobody." Though reluctant, Jimmy Ray agreed to lead Clara to the exact location where he'd disposed of Pops's body. The site matched the area where the forensic team had made their discovery, confirming his story. But Clara wasn't satisfied. "What about Tessa?" she asked. "Did Greer send you to dump her too?" Jimmy Ray shook his head vigorously. "No, ma'am. That night Harper came to me, said he needed help getting rid of something. Wouldn't say what, just handed me a bag and told me where to go. I figured it was drugs or contraband, not a person. By the time I realized what I'd done, well, it was too late." With Jimmy Ray's cooperation secured, Clara pieced together a timeline implicating multiple parties in covering up Tessa's murder. Greer orchestrated the initial drugging, using Evelyn Carter as his pawn. Red exploited Tessa's vulnerability to assert dominance over other inmates. Harper delivered the fatal blow in a moment of rage, then enlisted Jimmy Ray to dispose of the evidence. Each player contributed to the tragedy, yet none accepted full responsibility. But Clara couldn't ignore the broader implications. How many other bodies lay buried in the swamp? Victims of Oakwood's systemic corruption? To find out, she requested a full-scale investigation into the prison's operations, including audits of financial records, personnel files, and disciplinary reports. Her efforts paid off when analysts uncovered irregularities in funding allocations. Large sums of money had been funneled into offshore accounts linked to shell companies controlled by Warden Greer. Digging deeper, investigators discovered these funds originated from kickbacks paid by private contractors hired to renovate parts of the facility. In exchange, Greer ensured lucrative contracts were awarded without competitive bidding. The revelations painted a damning portrait of greed and complicity. Greer hadn't merely silenced Tessa and Pops to protect his reputation. He'd built an empire of exploitation within Oakwood's walls. Prisoners were used as cheap labor for construction projects, while staff members received bonuses for turning a blind eye to abuses. Confronted with mounting evidence, Greer finally cracked. During a tense interrogation, he admitted to orchestrating not only Tessa's death, but also a string of disappearances dating back years. Each victim had posed a threat to his operation, whether by witnessing wrongdoing or attempting to expose it. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Greer muttered, his voice hollow. "I thought I could control everything, keep it contained, but once you start down that road, you lose sight of where it ends," Clara finished for him. As charges mounted against Greer, Harper, Evelyn Carter, and several other accomplices, public outrage erupted. Media outlets descended on Oakwood, exposing decades of unchecked corruption. Calls for reform echoed across the state, prompting lawmakers to launch investigations into similar facilities nationwide. For Clara, however, the work wasn't over. Justice for Tessa Monroe meant more than punishing those responsible. It meant dismantling the systems that allowed such atrocities to occur in the first place. As she prepared to testify before legislative committees advocating for prison reform, she vowed never to forget the young woman whose death had sparked a reckoning. Yet even as progress unfolded, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that darkness still lingered in the swamp. Somewhere beneath its surface, untold stories waited to be unearthed. And until every secret saw the light of day, Clara knew her fight was far from finished. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling grounds of Oakwood Penitentiary. Detective Clara Hayes stood outside the crumbling walls of the facility, her mind racing as she processed the magnitude of what she'd uncovered. The swamp had yielded its secrets, bodies buried beneath layers of mud and decay. But it wasn't just the dead who spoke to her now. It was the living, those whose voices had been silenced by fear or complicity, yet still carried fragments of truth waiting to be pieced together. Clara's attention turned inward, to the labyrinthine corridors of Oakwood itself. While Warden Greer and his inner circle were behind bars awaiting trial, their removal had left a power vacuum within the prison. Inmates whispered of shifting alliances, new hierarchies forming among the gangs that ruled the cell blocks. Red, despite her involvement in Tessa's death, remained a dominant force, her influence bolstered by fear and manipulation. But Clara sensed there were others, lesser-known figures operating in the periphery, who might hold critical information about Oakwood's darkest secrets. Her first lead came from an unexpected source, an elderly inmate named Earl Doc Simmons. Doc had served nearly 3 decades for manslaughter and was widely regarded as harmless, a man who spent most of his days reading tattered paperbacks in the rec yard. Yet when Clara approached him during visiting hours, he surprised her with a cryptic warning. "Detective," Doc said, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses, "you think you've unraveled this mess, but you're only scratching the surface. There are things happening inside these walls that even Greer didn't know about." "What kind of things?" Clara asked, leaning closer. Doc hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "There's a group, not official, not sanctioned by anyone. They call themselves the Keepers. They deal in favors, debts, and disappearances. If someone needs to vanish quietly, they make it happen, and they don't answer to the warden." Clara's pulse quickened. "Do you have names?" Doc shook his head. "No names, just rumors. But if you want answers, talk to the new guy, Tommy Reyes. He's been asking questions too many people don't want answered." Tommy Reyes was a recent transfer from another facility, serving time for burglary. Unlike most inmates, he avoided aligning himself with any gang, choosing instead to keep to himself. When Clara requested a meeting, Tommy agreed, though his demeanor was guarded. "I heard about Monroe," Tommy began, fidgeting with the hem of his jumpsuit. "Everyone has. What happened to her? It shook things up. But you need to understand something. This place runs on secrets. People trade them like currency. Whoever controls the flow of information controls everything." Clara studied him carefully. "Are you saying there's more to Tessa's death than we already know?" Tommy nodded slowly. "Yeah, see, I overheard some guys talking about a ledger, some kind of record kept by the Keepers. Supposedly, it lists every favor done, every bribe paid, every life taken. If you find that ledger, you'll find your smoking gun." The mention of a ledger intrigued Clara. Such a document could expose the full extent of corruption within Oakwood, implicating not only current staff and inmates, but also individuals outside the prison system. But locating it would require navigating a web of lies and betrayals far more complex than anything she'd encountered so far. Her next move was to revisit Rachel Dupree. Though Red had cooperated minimally thus far, Clara suspected she knew more about the Keepers than she let on. This time, Clara entered solitary confinement armed with leverage. Immunity offers extended to certain inmates willing to testify against higher-ranking conspirators. Red listened intently as Clara laid out the deal. Her smirk faded, replaced by a calculating stare. Finally, she leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You really want to play with fire, Detective? The Keepers aren't just some gang. They're untouchable. Even Greer tiptoed around them. But fine, I'll tell you what I know. That ledger, it's hidden somewhere in Block D, room 417, used to belong to an old-timer named Biggs before he died. After that, it passed hands a few times, ending up with whoever's running the Keepers now." With Red's tip in hand, Clara coordinated a raid on Block D under the guise of routine maintenance checks. Officers swept through the designated room, uncovering a false panel in the wall behind which lay a small metal box. Inside was the ledger, a weathered notebook filled with handwritten entries detailing transactions, threats, and executions spanning years. Each page confirmed Clara's worst suspicions. The Keepers weren't merely enforcers. They were architects of chaos, orchestrating violence and extortion while maintaining plausible deniability. Among the entries was a chilling note dated shortly before Tessa's death. "Monroe, dispose of quietly, payment rendered." But the ledger also revealed something else, a name repeated multiple times in connection with high-profile incidents. Deputy Warden Victor Langston. Until now, Langston had flown under the radar, presenting himself as a loyal subordinate to Greer. Yet according to the ledger, he was deeply embedded in the Keepers' operations, serving as their liaison to external contacts. Confronting Langston proved challenging. As acting warden following Greer's arrest, he wielded considerable authority and access to resources. However, Clara played her cards carefully, using the ledger as bait to lure him into a false sense of security. During their meeting, Langston appeared calm, even amused, until Clara slid the open notebook across the table, pointing to his name scrawled repeatedly throughout its pages. "This ends today," Clara declared. "You can either cooperate or face charges alongside Greer and the rest. Your choice." Langston's composure shattered. He confessed to facilitating numerous illegal activities within Oakwood, including drug trafficking, forced labor schemes, and contract killings. According to him, the keepers operated independently of any single leader, relying instead on a network of operatives spread across the prison hierarchy. "They're everywhere," Langston admitted, his voice trembling. "Guards, inmates, administrators, even politicians on the outside. You shut down one branch, two more grow in its place." Though Langston's cooperation provided valuable insight, Clara recognized the enormity of dismantling such a pervasive organization. The keepers weren't confined to Oakwood. They represented a symptom of systemic rot infecting prisons nationwide. Eradicating them required not just arrest but comprehensive reform, an uphill battle fraught with resistance at every level. As Clara prepared to present her findings to state officials, she reflected on the cost of exposing the truth. Lives had been lost, families shattered, and countless others scarred by the horrors concealed within Oakwood's walls. Justice for Tessa Monroe demanded accountability, yes, but it also demanded change. And so Clara vowed to fight, not just for Tessa, but for all those whose voices had been silenced. Because in the end, the swamp held more than bodies. It held hope buried deep beneath the muck, waiting to rise again. The morning sun cast long, golden rays over the Louisiana State Capitol building, its domed roof gleaming against the blue sky. Inside, Detective Clara Hayes stood before a packed hearing room, her hands gripping the edges of a podium as she addressed lawmakers, journalists, and advocates gathered to discuss the future of Oakwood Penitentiary and the entire state prison system. Her voice was steady but carried an unmistakable weight, each word honed by months of relentless investigation. "What we've uncovered at Oakwood is not an isolated incident," Clara began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It is a microcosm of a much larger problem, a systemic failure that has allowed corruption, exploitation, and violence to flourish unchecked within our correctional facilities. The keepers are just one example of how power can be abused when accountability is absent, but they are far from alone." Behind her, a projection screen displayed key evidence from the case, excerpts from the ledger, surveillance footage showing illicit activities, and photographs of victims like Tessa Monroe and Calvin Jenkins. Each image told a story of lives destroyed, justice denied, and humanity stripped away behind bars. Clara continued, her tone unwavering. "We cannot address these issues without confronting the root causes: overcrowding, underfunding, inadequate oversight, and a culture that prioritizes punishment over rehabilitation. These problems have created fertile ground for predators like Warden Greer, Deputy Warden Langston, and their network of accomplices to thrive. If we want real change, we must dismantle this broken system piece by piece." Her testimony struck a nerve. Lawmakers exchanged uneasy glances while reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Advocacy groups, many of whom had long argued for reform, nodded in agreement, their faces etched with both hope and frustration. Among them sat Dr. Evelyn Martinez, a criminologist who had spent decades studying prison systems across the country. After Clara finished speaking, Martinez stepped forward to offer expert analysis. "The tragedy at Oakwood highlights a fundamental flaw in how we approach incarceration," Martinez stated, adjusting her glasses. "Prisons are meant to serve as institutions of justice, yet too often they become breeding grounds for further injustice. Without transparency, proper training, and meaningful support for inmates re-entering society, we perpetuate cycles of harm rather than breaking them." As the hearings progressed, Clara worked closely with investigators to ensure every angle of the case was thoroughly examined. In addition to prosecuting those directly involved in Tessa's murder, efforts expanded to hold accountable anyone implicated in the keeper's operations. This included contractors who profited from kickbacks, politicians who turned a blind eye, and even private companies exploiting inmate labor for profit. One such company, Apex Construction, came under intense scrutiny after documents revealed it had employed Oakwood prisoners to build luxury developments, without paying fair wages or providing safe working conditions. When confronted, Apex executives attempted to deflect blame, claiming ignorance of illegal practices. However, internal memos obtained through subpoenas painted a damning picture of collusion between corporate leaders and prison administrators. Public outrage reached a fever pitch as media outlets exposed these connections. Protests erupted outside state capitals nationwide, demanding accountability and reform. Families of victims joined forces with advocacy groups, forming coalitions aimed at pushing legislation to overhaul the prison system. Their rallying cry became clear: no more silence, no more secrets. Amidst the chaos, Clara found herself grappling with personal doubts. Though proud of what she'd accomplished, she couldn't ignore the lingering sense of futility. How could one detective, or even one movement, undo decades of entrenched corruption? What guarantee was there that new reforms wouldn't simply breed new forms of abuse? These questions weighed heavily on her mind during late-night drives home, the swampy landscape stretching endlessly beyond her car windows. One evening, as she passed a roadside memorial marking where Tessa's body had been discovered, Clara pulled over. She stepped out into the humid air, staring at the simple wooden cross adorned with faded flowers. "I won't let your death be in vain," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I promise you that." Back at headquarters, Clara threw herself into drafting recommendations for legislative action. Drawing on insights from experts like Dr. Martinez, she proposed measures ranging from increased funding for mental health services to stricter regulations governing private contractors. Most importantly, she advocated for independent oversight committees tasked with monitoring prison operations and investigating misconduct allegations. Her proposals gained traction quickly, buoyed by widespread public support. Within weeks, lawmakers introduced a comprehensive reform bill dubbed the Justice Restoration Act. Key provisions included mandatory audits of all state prisons, enhanced whistleblower protections for staff and inmates alike, and the establishment of a statewide commission dedicated to preventing future abuses. But passing the bill required navigating political minefields. Powerful lobbyists representing industries tied to the prison industrial complex fought tooth and nail to water down its provisions. Behind closed doors, heated debates raged over budget allocations, staffing requirements, and enforcement mechanisms. Clara attended countless meetings, testifying repeatedly to defend the integrity of the proposed reforms. At times, progress felt agonizingly slow, yet small victories kept her going. When a judge ruled in favor of granting immunity to several whistleblowers, including Jimmy Ray, the groundskeeper who'd cooperated with investigators, it signaled a shift toward prioritizing truth over retaliation. Similarly, when a federal court ordered immediate inspections of all facilities implicated in similar scandals, it reinforced the notion that accountability could no longer be ignored. By midsummer, momentum reached a tipping point. Public pressure forced reluctant lawmakers to vote in favor of the Justice Restoration Act, ensuring its passage with bipartisan support. As Governor Simone Broussard signed the bill into law during a televised ceremony, tears streamed down Clara's face. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. Yet even as celebrations unfolded, Clara remained vigilant. True change would take years, if not decades, to fully materialize. And lurking beneath the surface were remnants of the old guard determined to resist reform at every turn. Deputy Warden Langston, though cooperating with prosecutors, hinted ominously about others still operating in secret. "They think they're untouchable," he warned during a final debriefing session, "and maybe they are, for now. But sooner or later, someone will try to fill the void left by the keepers. You stop one monster, another rises to take its place." Clara absorbed his words silently, knowing he spoke the truth. Still, she refused to succumb to despair. Instead, she channeled her resolve into preparing for the next battle. With the Justice Restoration Act enacted, Oakwood Penitentiary faced closure pending reconstruction under strict oversight protocols. Its remaining inmates would be transferred to upgraded facilities designed to prioritize safety, dignity, and rehabilitation. As Clara drove past Oakwood's gates for what might be the last time, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From uncovering Tessa Monroe's tragic fate to exposing the sinister web of corruption entangled within the prison's walls, every step had tested her limits. Yet through it all, she had learned something invaluable. Justice wasn't merely about punishing wrongdoers. It was about creating a world where such wrongs couldn't happen in the first place. And so, as the sun set over the bayou once more, Clara Hayes vowed to keep fighting, not just for Tessa, but for everyone whose voice deserved to be heard. Because in the end, Breaking the chains of oppression meant more than locking away criminals. It meant forging a future built on compassion, accountability, and unyielding determination. The air smelled of fresh paint and sawdust as Detective Clara Hayes walked through the newly renovated corridors of Oakwood Penitentiary, or what remained of it. The facility had been stripped down to its bones, its crumbling walls replaced with reinforced concrete and glass designed to let in natural light. Gone were the dark, oppressive cells that had once housed despair. In their place stood open dormitories equipped with communal spaces meant to foster connection rather than isolation. Clara paused at a plaque mounted near the entrance, inscribed with Tessa Monroe's name alongside those of other victims whose deaths had sparked this transformation. Beneath the names was a simple message: in memory of those who lost their lives to injustice, may we honor them by building a better future. It wasn't much, just words etched into metal, but it carried the weight of countless sacrifices. As she continued her tour, Clara observed the changes firsthand. Inmates participated in vocational programs, teaching skills like carpentry, culinary arts, and coding. Therapy sessions offered mental health support tailored to individual needs, while educational workshops provided opportunities for earning high school diplomas or college credits. Even the staff seemed different, younger, more diverse, and rigorously trained in ethics and de-escalation techniques. But perhaps the most striking change was the presence of independent oversight monitors stationed throughout the facility. These individuals, appointed by the statewide commission created under the Justice Restoration Act, roamed freely, documenting incidents and ensuring compliance with new regulations. Their mere existence served as a constant reminder that accountability was no longer optional. It was mandatory. Clara's thoughts drifted back to the long road that had led here. She remembered the sleepless nights spent piecing together clues, the gut-wrenching conversations with grieving families, and the endless battles against entrenched interests determined to maintain the status quo. Each step had felt like pushing against an immovable wall, yet somehow they'd managed to break through. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. It was a text from Dr. Evelyn Martinez, inviting her to speak at a national conference on prison reform later that week. Attached was an article highlighting Clara's role in exposing Oakwood's corruption, praising her tenacity and commitment to justice. For a moment, pride swelled within her chest, but it quickly gave way to humility. This wasn't about her. It was about all the people who had fought alongside her, and all those who couldn't fight for themselves. Later that evening, Clara attended a community gathering organized by local advocacy groups. Families of former inmates, activists, and survivors of prison abuse came together to celebrate progress while acknowledging the work still ahead. As Clara took the stage, she scanned the room, recognizing familiar faces. Earl Doc Simmons, now released after serving his sentence. Rachel Dupree, transferred to a minimum security facility where she was reportedly thriving in art therapy classes. And even Jimmy Ray, who had found employment as a landscaper thanks to rehabilitation programs. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything is perfect," Clara began, her voice steady but warm. "We've made strides, yes, but true justice isn't achieved overnight. What we've done is plant seeds, seeds of hope, resilience, and accountability. Now it's up to all of us to nurture them." She went on to share stories of success, not just institutional victories but personal ones. An inmate who had earned her GED and was now mentoring younger women. A guard who had reported misconduct without fear of retaliation, knowing he'd be protected. A family reunited after years of separation, thanks to compassionate parole policies. When Clara finished speaking, the crowd erupted into applause. But what touched her most was the quiet determination reflected in their eyes. These were people who refused to give up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. They reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. Afterward, Clara lingered outside, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. A young girl approached hesitantly, clutching a drawing she'd made during one of the event's activities. On it was a picture of a woman standing tall beside a broken chain, surrounded by smiling figures holding hands. "For you," the girl said shyly, handing over the artwork. "Thank you for helping my daddy come home." Clara knelt down, meeting the child's gaze. "You're welcome, sweetheart, and thank your dad for being brave enough to change." As the girl ran back to her mother, Clara tucked the drawing into her pocket, feeling its weight settle deep within her heart. It was a reminder that every action mattered, no matter how small. Every life saved, every bond restored, contributed to a ripple effect capable of transforming entire communities. That night, Clara returned to her office, where stacks of case files awaited her attention. There were still investigations ongoing, other prisons, other scandals demanding exposure. Yet instead of dreading the workload, she embraced it. Each file represented another chance to make a difference, another opportunity to ensure no one else suffered as Tessa Monroe had. Before leaving, Clara opened a drawer and retrieved a photograph of Tessa, given to her by the young woman's mother. She placed it on her desk alongside the drawing, creating a makeshift shrine to resilience and renewal. Then, with a final glance around the room, she turned off the light and closed the door behind her. Outside, the stars twinkled above the bayou, their light refracting off the water like scattered diamonds. Clara stood for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. Somewhere in the distance, a frog croaked, followed by the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Life moved forward, always finding ways to grow, even in the darkest places. And so did Clara. With each step she took toward her car, she carried not just the memories of those she'd fought for, but also the promise of brighter days ahead. Because justice wasn't just about ending cycles of harm, it was about beginning new ones rooted in compassion, integrity, and hope. As the engine roared to life, Clara allowed herself a small smile. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in a very long time, she believed they were heading in the right direction.